Hi there, this is Catherine. Thank you so much for turning in to another episode of the Digital Marketing Victories podcast. Before we get into this month's episode, I just want to share with you the ways that you can support the podcast if you're finding the episodes helpful. You can send me a donation at buymeacoffee.com/DMV podcast. Any and all level of donation would be very much appreciated. Help me offset the cost of producing the podcast. I'd also encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter so that you don't miss a future episode or any other news about the podcast. And to do that, you go to wostrategies.com/newsletter. Okay, on with our episode. Welcome to the Digital Marketing Victories podcast, a monthly show where we celebrate and learn from the changemakers in digital marketing. Great digital marketers understand that people are the most challenging part of doing their jobs. And this show focuses on the people part of digital marketing wins, what tactics or skills the guests use to align people with their marketing strategy. I'm your host, Catherine Watsier-Ong, the owner of WO Strategies, LLC. We focus on increasing organic discovery for our enterprise-sized, science-focused clients. Thank you for joining me. Let's get into it and celebrate our victories. Today, we're joined by Dana DiTomaso. She's the founder and lead instructor at KP Playbook, president and partner at Kickpoint, where she helps people and teams do better marketing. Alongside the team at Kickpoint, she teaches people and teams how to set goals and track results so that they understand what strategies and tactics bring real value. In addition to speaking at conferences about reporting and analytics, SEO, and brand building, she's a weekly columnist on CBC Edmond AM, and she teaches analytics at the University of Alabama. And for everyone listening, this episode is going to be perfect for you if you're curious about how to develop your analytic thinking, become comfortable analyzing data and using it to persuade others. If you need some tips around selecting and presenting data when you're persuading others to change their behavior, using data to guide a ruthless prioritization process to streamline your marketing requests. I know that's a challenge with technical SEO, figuring out what to prioritize. And how to persuade others when the data is missing or unreliable. Particularly, Dana's been talking a lot about that this year, and that's why I brought her on the show. But I know that some people also, I've had challenges in the past about building an analytics culture if you happen to be an organization that's kind of new to SEO, and then how to deal with pushback from stakeholders or clients if they maybe disagree with your data analysis. Cool. So Dana, welcome to the show. Can you just tell folks a little bit more about you? I think most people listening know who you are, but give us a little bit of your background, how you got into the analytics piece.
Yeah, for sure. So my origin story is I went to school for geography, which I use every day in my current career. But what happened is when I graduated at the late 90s, I ended up working in software. And then from there, I started tinkering with websites. I started freelancing in 2000. So I've been doing this a real long time now. And my first website client said to me, "Hey, how do I get in Google?" And I said, "I don't know. I'll get back to you." And that's when I discovered Rand Fishkin's blog before SEO Moz, like back in the early days.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And like Jill Whalen, for example, is now retired from the field. She gave me a ticket to SES Toronto 2004. That was my first search conference. So yeah, I'm doing this a real long time. And then, I mean, I did SEO for a long time, love SEO, still do it a little bit, but what started happening around, I would say like 2017-ish, is we started to get more into Google Tag Manager. Version 2 of Google Tag Manager came out. I'm like, okay, I got to learn this thing. Clients are asking about data. We have analytics, but like it probably could be better. And so that ended up completely occupying my brain. And when the GA4 launch came out, it's just I ended up diving so deeply into it that is now my main area of expertise.
And we are
for sure.
so glad you did. Because somebody had to get over.
I was talking to my wife, and I was like, "What a weird thing to suddenly be an expert in. Like who saw this coming?" And she's like, "Yeah, you get super into stuff." I'm like, "Yeah, but GA4, was that really like a good choice?" So
I mean, there's like two of you that folks follow that and really know how it works. The rest of us, no matter how many trainings I go through, we're still like, where do I go for this? At least that's my story.
Well, and every time I go on vacation, something changes. This is the joke, is like every time I go on vacation, there's a major feature announcement. So my next vacation will be the first week of April. We'll find out.
We'll find out. Right? So everybody put that on your calendar. There's going to be some major change. Exactly. So let's start off by thinking about analytical thinking. So what if a digital marketer is kind of new to having an analytical thinking kind of process? What strategies do you recommend that they take, or tips for them to get those skills?
I mean, it's funny because people are like, "Oh, I don't really like math." You don't have to like math. I mean, the reason why I have a geography degree is because I failed calculus so many times. I decided a science degree was not. So I left biology and went to geography. Didn't need calculus to graduate from that. And yeah, I mean, we took one stats class that was called Stats for Geographers, and it was just like real basic statistics, but I don't necessarily use that. I think the biggest thing when you're thinking about it from an analytical perspective is what is realistically something we can measure, but then also understanding the limitations of that measurement. And so, you mentioned I've been speaking a lot about analytics data isn't perfect, et cetera. There's a blog post, which we can link to in the show notes about, your marketing data isn't right. Can it be fixed? Spoiler alert. No, it can't be fixed. And that's okay. So I think it's important just to understand the limitations of the product more so than, oh, I need to figure out the cosine or whatever of this thing. Like, don't worry about that. Like right now, if you're just getting into it, just learn how the data gets in and how you get the data out and what are the limitations of that process.
Yeah, I actually, when I saw or read and listened to your Whiteboard Friday article, and mind you, I also saw the presentation you had at MozCon, but between the two, honestly, I felt better about my own skill set because I'm also not really big on the math piece, but I feel like I can talk about trending stuff. I can talk about how to make this. I can definitely talk about limitations. I've got this blog post on my website about the limitations of Google Search Console because it feels like every week there's like a new insight somebody has that's like, oh, you can't track that or that's buried under here. Right. And I never remember all of them because there's so many like caveats with Google Search Console. So I just keep updating the blog post for my own reference. But I feel like I can talk people through that. Similarly, once I saw your presentation, I was like, oh, I can totally talk people through how we shouldn't obsess because we've lost so much tracking. This is sort of the trend that's happening. I was right there with you.
Good.
Yeah. So do you recommend that data marketers or marketers in general balance data-driven as well as creative ideas and qualitative? Do you encourage them to think about all three?
Yeah,
or one over the other?
And I actually don't like the phrase data driven. I know a lot of people use that. It's more, we're starting to use the phrase data informed, as in you're not solely going to make decisions based on the data, but you should look at it and help it have it inform what you're going to do,
Right.
And not because there's lots of stuff. Again, if we're accepting that we can't measure everything, then there's going to be some stuff that we can't measure. And as a marketer, you're not, a robot taking an input and putting out output. That's what the AI tools are for. Instead, you're applying your marketing brain and saying, okay, so I know this, and this is true, and I'm seeing this trend. Now what do we do? And I think that's really the critical part that a marketer brings. And that's what makes you better than, say, an AI bot when it comes to marketing.
Right. And I mean, I remember the days because I've been in the business about as long as you have been doing it for 20 years. And I remember when we had keywords, for instance. So there was this moment where we were really detail oriented or trying to be with the data. But on the flip side, I spent 5 years working at a PR firm. And I will reassure all of you that they kind of measure very little.
Yes.
And they definitely get paid.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And same thing with like PPC people. Like talk to a PPC person sometime if you don't know any and talk to them about results reporting because it's so interesting when I see results from PPC people. And I'm not saying this to shade PPC people. You're great. Love talking to you. But sometimes those reports are based on entirely impressions, not even clicks. Not even, conversions, God forbid. And so I think just impressions, especially for things like connected TV, like that's all we're seeing in those reports, right? Nothing about follow through, but that's okay too, because brand building is also an important marketing strategy. And I literally just hosted a podcast with Leda Solis where we talked about the importance of brand building when it comes to SEO. So there's that part of it. So don't be so obsessed with like that end part of it. And I think that that's where SEOs really can fault themselves because they're like, well, I couldn't track it, so it doesn't count. It's like if you go for a walk and you're not wearing your Apple Watch, you didn't close the rings. Did it actually count? Yeah, you still went for a walk. Some people are going to have ad blockers. Some people, especially when it comes to local SEO, for example, is really, really where I started. Like, I don't really care how they get in touch with my client. I just want them to do it. If they look up the client on maps and then drive to the store, am I going to know? No, but it happened. Cool. Like,
Right.
no one's going to walk in the store and be like, I'm here today because I happen to see you come up on maps. Like, it's not going to happen. So there has to be that part of it too, where things are growing and the work you're doing is important and it's helping, but there isn't necessarily that direct benefit. And so that's why in that talk at MozCon, I talked a lot about that effectiveness metric, where you take all the impressions of all the metric in connected TV, billboards, Search Console, ads, all of it, add it all up, divide it by the number of transactions or conversions or whatever that bottom line metric is that you can track. Look at that percentage. If you do new things, did it go up or did it go down? So thinking about, for example, technical SEO, if you make the site faster, did it make the conversion rate go up, or did people just have a better time on the site and then they're more likely to get in touch with that particular client, right? You wouldn't necessarily be able to measure the conversion rate improvements. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But if it's, for example, people walking into a store, then maybe you won't know, but you'll know that generally, the number of transactions for that client has gone up as you did this technical SEO work. Therefore, your work is probably having an impact. Like, well, probably isn't good enough. Well, guess what? It's 2025 and probably has to be good enough sometimes. So sorry.
And once you watch her presentation, if you are a marketer, I now hear you in my head every time I strip a UTM.
I know. How
which I do all the time.
Everybody does it all the time. I do it sometimes. It's yeah. And actually that presentation I recorded, it's on YouTube now. So if you go to the Kickpoint Playbook YouTube channel, you can watch. It's a presentation I gave to members of my analytics for agencies and practical GA4 courses before MozCon. And then we just released it. So it is on the YouTube now. So you can check it out.
Great. Yeah, definitely check it out. Okay. So we've talked a lot about, the misleading data. Now, if you're going to select data to present to somebody, what's the key factors you think about if you're going to be putting together a persuasive presentation to pivot somebody else's actions or for them to come on board with your marketing campaign?
I want to know what they care about and what are the terms that they use. Because there's really nothing worse than someone feeling like they're being talked over, especially if they're already suspicious of you. So sometimes, for example, I'll come in to do, say, a training or an audit, and the person who set up GA4 originally is like, oh, this consultant's going to come in and they're just going to tell everybody how bad I am. And I'm like, hey, this is not my goal here. I want to make you look good. So really establishing that rapport is really important. But then also, what does your boss say? Do they say, I want the phone to ring? Okay, great. Then that's what we're going to talk about. I'm not going to say phone call conversions from, organic search. I'm going to talk about number of people who Googled you and then called you, right? So really making sure that you're reframing your language. And even if it's not terms you necessarily always use, don't force them to come to you. You should go to them. And this is especially important agency side. In-house, you're kind of like a little agency sometimes because it's not like everybody at that workplace does what you do. You're like your own little agency inside the larger organization. So really thinking about changing your language to meet them where they are so they don't feel like they're being talked down to. And you really want to try to break down that wall for sure. So it's not us versus them or like my data is better than your data. It's all right, this is interesting. Let's take a look at this. How about we take a look at this too? And then we're going to come together and make some decisions. And I think it's more going for that sort of consensus situation is really critical. So, and again, really dial it back on what you present. Nobody likes a table except for you. And this is something I hammer home with marketers all the time, especially SEOs. We love Excel. We love Google Sheets. We use them all the time. Normal human beings don't like tables. Normal human beings don't use Excel unless they're like economists, and that's not usually who we're presenting to. We're not talking to the accountants. We aren't accountants. So stop showing tables, show graphs, show things that people can look at and understand immediately what it is that they're looking at without them having to really think about it a lot. Because you don't want the friction to be the chart you present. You want the friction to be spent in changing their thinking about data and how much is coming in and what they can measure and what they can't measure. So I think it's just a matter of really thinking about how can you make this as accessible as possible, Have someone in your life who you can go over this stuff with, who doesn't actually really know what's going on, but knows enough. Like sometimes I'll show things to my wife and I'm like, do you know what's going on? She works in a museum. Like she probably knows more about GA4 just existing in this house than most people would say work in museums.
That's my husband. He's a musician, but I'm like, could you read this for me? Same thing. Yeah.
Right. But I'll show her charts and be like, does this make sense? And then she's like, oh, I don't get this part. Okay, great. That's really helpful. Right. So show it to somebody else who isn't a marketer and get their feedback and also be open to feedback too. None of us is perfect.
Yeah. So what about if you are so you talked about like streamlining it. Oh, I know what my additional thought was. So, do you have any tips that isn't Tufte, because I'm going to bring up Edward Tufte, which I covered in graduate school, because of the story about the Challenger explosion being driven by a bad graph is burned into my memory. But I don't know if there's an easy way for anybody to pick that up with like an online article at the moment, other than buying his book and digging through the book. Do you have something similar where people have some awareness of how important it is to make sure that the graph is sort of accurate so that people don't misinterpret the data when it's in a graph?
Yeah, so often there's some examples in the blog post about the marketing data being correct or incorrect, and can we fix it? No. So it's, I think one of the things that I've been doing a lot of is, instead of showing, for example, you've got like landing pages and sessions and conversion rate / key event rates. No one says key events, but let's pretend that Google actually is making this happen. It's like fetch. It's not gonna happen, Google. So, instead of showing landing pages and then a number of sessions and a number of key events or whatever it might be, show them as percentages of the total. 49% of the visits came to this landing page and 23% of the conversions from this landing page. Okay, well, those numbers don't appear to line up. What's going on? Why isn't this page doing as good of a job as it could be, right? That's an immediate way to show if a page is, say, hitting above or below its weight in terms of conversions. And are the right pages bringing people through in terms of conversions as well? And so that's something where if you just show the percentage of the total and don't include the decimal points, I do this in Looker Studio. I have a video on that blog post on exactly how to do this. But by default, in Looker Studio, they'll say 49.26. I do not care. 49.50. That's just show the numbers. Don't show the decimals. Like, the less numbers you can show, the better. But again, it's really easy to look at the colored bars and see, do the colored bars match, right? And so anyone can grasp that chart, even if you don't read at all. You can still see the colored bars. So there's some charts I present that don't have any numbers on them at all. And they're just layered pie charts, a donut wrapped around a pie chart. I also have an example of that on the website too. So you can have a report that can show that your mobile website sucks without ever actually having to present a single number at all. And there's ways to do this, and it's just so visual and so easy for anyone to understand. And I think that that's truly like one of the strongest reports you could present to people.
Oh, and it definitely sounds like a skill people have to work on. Not only absorb the information, but then, make sure that's what
and
they're.
I think there's a bit of insecurity too, like, especially if you're just getting started and you're like, oh, this person is, agency side, you're like, this person is paying me all this money. I have to present this giant report. Like, we're not being paid by the pound. What, and there is certainly some confidence that has to go behind showing a client who's paying you a lot of money a 1 or 2 page report with the results, right? But really thinking about it, like, nobody is excited about a 50-page report review. No one wants this. So if they want more details, you can dig into it, bring the supplemental pieces. But reality is, like, you're just showing these top level metrics, and then you can dig in if you need to. So really err on the side of like not picking the metrics that are going to be the most impactful for that situation, and have supporting data, of course, but don't try to show everything, because nobody cares. They just want to know, am I making money? Am I making money by hiring you? Am I making money by continuing to pay you your salary? That's the real question.
Oh, I mean, also it's attention span. I mean, I do a training on online writing, of course, as most SEOs do. And, we've lost attention, the attention span over the years. We've got less of attention than a goldfish. And I think it also parlays over to other parts of our life. It's not just interacting online. I just think that most of us don't have a lot of attention span. Unfortunately, the internet's changed our brains a bit, I think.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think it's just like, presenting reports is never a thrill ride. Like, try to make it as interesting as possible, but also accept the reality that, like, this is not exactly an exciting part of your day.
Right. And not an exciting part of their day. So that's the reason not to do, pounds of reporting.
One of the first jobs I had after university, so when I worked in software, was I was doing training for CRM software. And this will date me how old I am. It was for Lotus Notes CRM software. Oh, yeah. So I flew all over the States doing training to salespeople who didn't want to be there because they're salespeople and they, are movement oriented, action oriented, making phone calls kind of people. I was wasting a whole day of their time when they could have been making commissions. And they didn't have any input in the software. A lot of the time they were just like handed this and said, here, you have to use it. One time I showed up at a training, I think it was in San Antonio, and the sales team had just decided to go golfing. And so the client's like, yeah, none of them are, I guess we're going to have to, I don't know, you want to go to the Alamo? Like, yeah, okay, cool, sure. That was what we ended up doing. So I think it's a matter of like really accepting that your audience may not want to be there and just trying to make it as entertaining as possible. Like, not, show and dance, but that's part of what goes into my speaking now is that experience, that early experience, trying to get bored salespeople excited about CRM software.
Yep. I've had similar kind of experiences.
Yeah.
My first trainees were grandmothers when I was
Oh yeah.
training folks about SEO. So
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of similar.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have one episode of the show where we talk about delivering negative news, but I am kind of
Mm-hmm.
curious whether you have your own opinions about how you go about structuring your communication style, what you actually present
Mm-hmm.
when it's negative stuff that you need to convey.
Yeah, I usually try to just not beat around the bush, like just get into it immediately. So I can think of probably the worst piece of negative news recently that comes to mind that I had to deliver was one client we're helping with the GA4 transition. This is pre-sunset of UA. And we put the GA4 code on the site. And suddenly they're like, what? Something's wrong. Our traffic has been cut in like we got 25% of our traffic in GA4 and 100% of it in UA. I'm like, oh, I've done something horribly wrong. What's going on? And I go and look, and it turns out that they had their UA code 4 times on the site. So it was recording
Ooh.
4 page visits for every single visit
Mm.
because UA would allow that duplication. And in
Mhm.
GA4, there's a setting which some people have turned off if you have a really old GA4, but usually it's turned on that stops duplicate traffic from being recorded. And so I did a crawl of the site with Screaming Frog and I pulled all the pages, and some pages had it on there 6 times, some pages had it on there 2 times. It was just like completely inconsistent. But some of it is that like their traffic reports that they've been providing for years were basically fairy tales. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, I was able to talk to the client and be like, hey, look, I know you've been presenting this to your boss every month, but somehow we're going to have to come up with a way to like figure out how to be like, oh, this is wrong. And so I think trying to get them on your side immediately and be like, it's not me data versus you data. It's, this horrible thing has happened and now we're going to fix it together, and just really trying to be like, look, this is what happened. We don't know how it happened. It turns out the developers were just like adding the code in random places for no good reason. So we got everything in Tag Manager, which sorted the problem. And, it's better in GA4 now, but it's still like a horrible thing to have to realize that things have been wrong for years. And so like that's the kind of thing that people think, oh God, I'm going to get fired. And it's like that's where you have to really figure out, don't lie about it. Be honest, be upfront, and just be like, look, this is what happened. And if you screwed up, then, say, I screwed up. This is what I did. Explain how you're going to fix it, and then explain how you're not going to let that happen again.
Right.
So that's the other part of it too, and sometimes certainly, I've screwed up in my career and we've lost a client because of it. Happens to everybody. And I think it's just like it's part of accepting that you're human. And we all do stupid things at least once. Like I'm sure everyone has sent an email accidentally to the wrong person at some point in their careers. And this is before Gmail had the no, I want that back button.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like everybody has screwed up at some point. And just remember that some scripts are more public than others. And really it's just an opportunity to learn from stuff. No one hits it 100% of the time. And that's okay.
Yeah. I actually had a client, it was relatively short term because I was just helping with a migration and then it sort of petered out. They didn't want additional help, but, and maybe I doomed myself, but I did get into the analytics and they were a publisher and I discovered that they were perpetually refreshing their homepage and selling advertising.
Wow.
And when I pointed it out to them, they knew what they were doing and they did not want any advice from me. Like,
okay. Yeah. And at that point, you're like, you know what? I've done my due diligence. I'm just going to walk away now. Yep. Yeah, I remember one client too. They had a refresh on their homepage, and their bounce rate, this is UA land, was like 0.06%. And I was like, hey, when we do these changes for your analytics, this is gonna impact your bounce rate. They're like, but our bounce rate is so good. I'm like, but it's a lie. It's not a real metric,
Exactly. Yeah.
And their web developer knew that what was going on and fought me so hard on making those changes. And I don't know if we ended up just stopping working with them because it was just like, I can't help you if you're not gonna let me help you.
Yeah.
Help me help you.
I know. I mean, I was the point person for analytics for at least a year at Ketchum before I started hiring my team. And somebody came up to me with this website that was well before I even started. They're like, can you tell us how much traffic it's got? And I'm like, and it was built by Ketchum. And I was like, well, it has no analytics on it. They're like, well, you can't tell us anything. Yeah, I can't tell you anything.
Yes,
how it goes.
It's just all fairy tales at this point. Yeah,
it's totally fairy tales. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit to like the technical SEO side. What if you've got all these data points and you have to sort through the actions and start prioritizing them based on what could be taken? And ultimately, what are your takeaways there? What kind of tips do you have for people there?
Yeah, usually I start by thinking about, effort and impact. And so as a real broad triage is just like 1 through 3 for effort, 1 through 3 for impact. Start there and then go back and be like, okay, these things are really critical. Is it actually going to happen?
Right.
Who's responsible for
Mm-hmm.
this? Does that mean it's actually going to happen? And I think a big mistake that people make, again, just thinking you're being paid by the pound and you present this enormous audit. And sometimes I have done that at the request of the client when they're working with an external vendor who's refusing to accept anything is wrong with their beautiful, perfect website when things
I've
are
had
horribly
those.
wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the worst one I saw recently, I posted about this in the Women in Tech SEO, was when you went to a 404 URL, it showed the homepage and it presented a 200 code. Like, how do you even do that? Like, what?
That's very creative.
And the client asked me, they're like, how are they doing this? Like, I don't know anymore,
I
man.
don't know, right?
It was a custom built CMS too, on top of everything else.
Uh,
Like, it's 2025. There's lots of options out there. Don't build your own CMS anymore. Yeah.
right.
Maybe
Yeah.
in like 96 you could do that. But anyway, so I think I think that that's really important too, is just to realize like what's actually going to get implemented. And also go through it with, the client, be like, hey, look, these are the top 10 things that I've pulled out of this list. Here's some things that we can do. And here's some things that I think your team should do or your team has to do. What's their availability like? Can we get some
Right.
points or however else, like find out how they work? Are they working on a point system? Are they working on time? Are they, how can you get on one of their sprints or whatever it is that they work on? And sometimes pick something first that you think is going to be a big win, because that can really get them on board for future stuff. So one client we were working with, they were a home builder and they had this wild canonicalization situation where they had homes that were already built, quick possession homes. And then they had homes where it was like, here's the show home. And so each of the quick possession homes rel canonicaled to the show home, even though the pages were completely different. And I was like, and they're like, yeah, I don't know why these pages just aren't, being picked up. And the show home pages were actually feeling the impact of that. And they weren't really coming up in search results. And it's like, well, let's fix all these canonicals. They were so skeptical. I'm like, let's just try it. And if it doesn't work, we can switch it back, like, let's just see what happens. Cause the internet, it's all about experimentation, right?
Right.
Little
Exactly.
jazz
Yeah.
hands there. And I have never seen, I think they got 70% of organic traffic back in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And I'd never seen that happen before. I was like, I did
Yeah.
not see this coming. And I told them too. I was like, I was expecting maybe like 10%, 20%, maybe if I had a good day, 70%. And then after that, every single recommendation we made was implemented immediately. Right. And so, like, I can't guarantee you're going to get that kind of halo, but go through and be like, what is the easiest thing that we think can be implemented without a ton of effort, even if it isn't necessarily the thing that is the most on fire? What feels quickest to be able to see some impact as soon as possible, because that can really help you get buy-in. And yeah, of course you want to start with the things that are absolutely the most on fire, but is there something that's super fast? So maybe it's like the robots file is restricting the image folder, and that like every time you Google search a really important phrase for this particular website, like an image search is shown, maybe you just need to allow the images to be indexed. Maybe that's all you have to do at that point, right? Just do that and then see what happens, right? So maybe that's one of the quick wins. I think the thing that I get most frustrated, especially with WordPress websites, and we develop WordPress websites, so we run into WordPress devs all the time, and like there's a real difference in a WordPress developer and someone who has a theme and clicks buttons in the theme.
Yes.
And it's people are like, oh, well, I'm using Oxygen to build my website. It's like, oh, great. That's really excited to take a look at this thing. Like, I think that's where you don't call yourself a WordPress developer. I'm sorry. I hate being a gatekeeper, but like, please, it's not WordPress development. You're basically building a theme on top of the platform at that point. And you're going to have technical SEO issues as a result. So if you're okay with that, like, accept there's going to be technical SEO issues, and maybe you're going to have to spend more on paid as a result. You're going to have to invest more in content as a result, or whatever it might be. Maybe do more connected TV ads or whatever it's going to be. But you're going to have to invest more elsewhere because you have these technical limitations.
Right. Totally. So I'm also kind of curious because it's been floating around over the last month about whether or not you've pivoted the conversation when you get a little stuck persuading somebody and talked about what would happen if you took no action. Yeah. And I forget who shared this. It might be Search Pilot, about what the impact would be if you did no SEO for 3 years. Do you love podcasts? Have you ever thought about creating your own podcast? What are you waiting for? Get started at podup.com. PodUp is one of the sponsors of this podcast, and they would love to someday sponsor yours. Starting is as easy as creating an account at podup.com today. PodUp has everything you need to run a full professional show with over 35 different tools with AI integration. Get a 7-day free trial with no credit card required and 15% off with the code digitalmarketingvictories15. Don't have time to start a podcast? Check out podallies.com. Get a team of podcast professionals to do all of the website, social media, and editing work for your podcast. Pod Allies is an agency run by the folks who built the PodUp podcasting software. Get started with them at podallies.com. Get 15% off when you sign up for today for either PodUp or Pod Allies with the code digitalmarketingvictories15. PodUp and Pod Allies can't wait to create with you and launch your podcast.
Yeah. And I think actually there's some people are about to find out because there's a lot of, like, economy wise, one of the first things to go when the economy is potentially in a downturn or there's uncertainty in the market is people ditch spending on marketing, right?
Yeah.
And, we've had situations where you always end up with a great case study where, like, a client's credit card gets compromised and then their Google ads get shut off. And you're like, great, I guess for the next 2 weeks, we're going to find out what happens if they have no Google ads. And it's like, yeah, that's a great case study, unfortunately. But yeah, same thing with SEO. I think that there is one of the things that I usually say is, like, if you don't do any SEO, your competitors are going to keep doing SEO. So when you do finally turn it back, it's not ads. You can't just turn it back on again. It's not a tap. So you're going to have to catch up with not only where the competitors were, but then also, where you're going with that as well. So your competitor starts here and you decide, I'm just going to sit here at the start line. I'm not actually going to do anything. But the competitors are running ahead and you're like, okay, well, great. Now I have 1 year to catch up with their 3 years of effort. It's not physically possible,
Right.
And I think that that's where, and you're going to lose all that institutional knowledge of, like, if you get rid of your SEO team internally, you're going to lose all that institutional knowledge of what SEO is doing. And right now, SEO is in one of those periods where it's going through a massive amount of change. Like, I think about the Florida update and how that changed SEO. And for people who are too young to know what I'm talking about, Google it. But that was the first major shakeup in terms of SEO. And that felt like a huge difference for SEO. And I feel like this AI stuff and everything else we're going through, quality content and overviews and everything else, is another massive shakeup in SEO. So if you lose that knowledge, you have to start over again. Like, that's rough. So maybe pull back and don't do as much if you but you got to keep an eye on your competitors. And if they're doubling down, and honestly, I think that if I was advising a company on this and they're like, I don't know what we're going to do, maybe now's the time to invest, because if your competitors are going to stop investing, this is your chance.
Normally, I do not share stuff by Neil Patel particularly, but he also did some research about what happens when you stop doing social, which I thought was very interesting, because it's just new research that I have seen. Same thing. You stop doing it, you're going to see a decrease in traffic and engagement and brand awareness and all the rest. Unfortunately, it's an always on
channel
thing.
You weren't seeing anything from. So for example, I've stopped posting on Twitter/X. And, but picked up on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. And I think too, for companies, like, you don't have to be everywhere. That's okay. Just make sure to say, like, we're over here now. And so that people don't come to you looking for customer service support or something.
Right. Yeah. And then when I started to catch them, they had a set of social accounts that they gave to every single client. And I was like, why? They're very different brands and their audience is not particularly on all of these platforms. And we should never launch with 4 all at once. A lot, unless you got a ton of budget, crank it back to ones where you could actually be successful.
Well, you just toss the intern on that, right? They can just crank out social media content. No problem. Yeah.
Or that. If you do have lower level people, I'm going to plug this actually. I actually have a guide on my website about how to codify your brand voice and actually train all of your lower level employees to make sure they're consistently answering in your brand voice and staying within guidelines, because I actually had to do that once. So if that's you, feel free to grab the guide. It's free. So how do you, here we get to the part where I was talking about in relation to the most recent speaking engagements you've had, but so what do you do when the stuff is missing? And how do you coach people to make confident decisions when the data does not provide a clear answer or it's missing?
I'm working on a post right now about the analytics hierarchy. And some people, like, level 0 is we have no analytics, because that still happens. People don't have analytics, or they don't know where it is. Maybe lost the login. Well, the agency is like, oh, you're not working with it anymore. We're taking our analytics with us. Like, First off, agency people, don't do that. It's not a good way to keep clients. It's never worked. It's not going to work. It's just going to piss people off. And then a 5 is like you know, basically are like that meme of, you know, the galaxy brain analytics, right? Like nobody's ever there. So really thinking about where are you at on that stages, and then what's the appropriate decision for this. So if you are literally like you're working with a client or somewhere and they have no analytics at all, then get some. First step, just add it to the site. And then you might have to make some judgment calls based on what third-party tools are telling you in terms of volume or audience size, or looking at your competitors and seeing what they're doing. You know, like I think at that point you really are just going off of what competitors are doing. And if you do use tools like SEMrush or similar web that give you estimates of traffic, put your own site in addition to those competitors. And if your own site, once you do have some data, is somewhat close to what it says in there, great. Maybe your competitors are also somewhat close to what their reality is. But if you go into similar web and they're like, you have 1 million visitors a month when you know you have like 20,000, then it's probably off by that degree as well. And especially for people in smaller industries, those tools aren't going to do anything for you. If you are a small, you know, several location business in one geography, those kinds of competitive research tools unfortunately aren't really going to help. So you do have to have like some data to go off of, for sure.
Since this podcast is all about soft skills, so what are the soft skills that you think analytic people need, particularly when you're receiving pushback or resistance?
You definitely have to be very pleasant.
Pleasant? Okay.
I think pleasant, like, and get a good poker face for sure. I say this as someone who doesn't always necessarily have a great poker face. But I don't, my father-in-law used to be in the Navy. He's very good at poker. And since I live out here now and he plays against me, I finally beat him once. Like, I know, right? Like, it's never going to happen again. But once I did. So I finally got good at a poker face. But I think for sure, like being able to take in information and just being comfortable being like, I don't know, I'll get back to you. Like that is a really important skill as well, to just be honest. And unfortunately, sometimes some people are going to lie, and you just have to not necessarily poop on them too much about it, because nobody likes someone who's there just smack talking a competitor either. So I think it's that balance of like being honest, being pleasant and cheerful, charming, maybe, you know, and but also not like in a slimy snake oil salesman kind of way, because what you're presenting from an analytics perspective is not exactly exciting to people, or they already might be coming into it with their backup because they feel like they're going to get talked over if that's been their previous experience with an analytics person. So being able to ensure that you're watching how people are responding to you, that body language, if it's on Zoom, like, are they engaging with the camera? Are they looking down or off to the side? Are they, you know, fiddling with stuff? Are they actually paying attention? Or there's some people who just like have to draw or write while they talk to you, and that's something that you'll learn about them over time. But really watching people's body language and seeing how they're responding to you is really critical. And when I'm doing training, I'm definitely like looking around, seeing how people are responding, and then really thinking about, you know, this person seems like they're disengaging a little bit, but I don't want to call them out in front of everyone else because that's embarrassing. But like, take a break, go over and be like, hey, you know, how are you enjoying it? Don't be like, hey, I noticed you weren't paying attention. Are you hating this thing? Maybe they had an emergency come up or something, and be like, hey, how's it going? Is there anything else I can cover? And sometimes people are comfortable telling you in a one-on-one situation when they're not comfortable telling you in front of a crowd. So just really like trying to get, honestly, people to like you is almost as important as presenting good data.
It's huge. It's huge on the sales end. I mean, I actually had a job in sales once in my life, and it floored me how many people I was able to sell the product to that, frankly, it was the online internet product. And sometimes I presented it without internet. I still sold it like brochure, and we talk about it. And in one instance, it was because all the friends bought it. Like I would strategically go into a state and like sell to all the other like organizations, and then circle back to the one that was 80 and had no internet. Hey, your friends have bought it, and she would buy it. It was all about like befriending their friends and being liked. It's kind of amazing how much sales is part of that.
I also think there's 2 great books by April Dunford that I recommend people read, and they're actually on the shelf behind me right now. So the first one is Obviously Awesome, and that talks about brand positioning for products, but it also I really took it as like a brand positioning for yourself and how you're talking to people. And then the second one is Sales Pitch, and that's definitely more sales oriented. Both books are super quick. I read them both. I read one flying from Vancouver to Toronto and the other one flying from Toronto to Vancouver. So it is, it's a quick 4.5 hour read.
Yeah.
And yeah, fantastic. And April as well, she has a podcast. She's probably one of my top speakers to watch of all time. If you're looking for tips on how to be a better speaker, watch some of April's talks. She's just at the top of her game. But I really like what she has to say about positioning. And as you read it and you're thinking about yourself and how you position yourself and how you bring your product, which is reporting or discussions or consulting or whatever it might be, to clients or internally, think about how you can position those.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So let's talk a little bit about an analytics culture. So if you're helping, I mean, you run an agency. So in this instance, it would be helping a client brand new to SEO sort of look at the data on a regular basis and build that cadence. Particularly in my case, I'm also talking to people about the next step after that, which is maybe rework some job descriptions so it's a little bit tied to how things perform. So there's a carrot and a stick, because otherwise you're never going to, some people are going to instantly be interested in what you're doing and pick it up because they just happen to be dorky and they're excited about it. But the vast majority of people need some sort of push or pull to align with this internet culture thing that was not part of the culture before. So what kind of tips do you have about how to engineer that or help the client engineer it?
Yeah, I typically like to have some sort of recurring meetings with clients, and that's just like can be like a check-in, because sometimes too you're pretty low on their priority list from an agency perspective. Like you are not, sadly, top of mind for the client most of the time unless things are going wrong. So the important thing is to keep that keep that conversation going even when things are going well. And so set up regular calls with them, especially if you have to do items for them, because that will remind them to do the thing before the call. Otherwise, it may not ever actually get done. And this is important as well for like technical SEO, for really anything. Like you got to schedule those regular checkups or else it'll never happen. It'll get put off until everyone dies. Heat death of the universe, those technical SEO pieces are still not, implemented. So I think it's important to have those regular calls. And then also on those calls, really thinking about what do I want to review with them? So sometimes I'll start off with just like hey, let's take a look and see how things are going, and then be like, hey, I noticed this, and then having discussions about those pieces. And that can go in all sorts of really interesting directions. Usually, I'll have my main screen, my Zoom, and then I have my second screen. I'll have some notes I've written for myself in advance. I'll have the reports. I'll have like some stuff ready for screen sharing, but also just thinking and also having their website open and being like, all right, let's walk through this. Let's do this Google search and see what comes up. And let's talk about how this path would go for a potential user who's thinking about this. And sometimes, also show the client mobile. Don't always show them desktop, especially if mobile is more than like half of their traffic, which in B2C industries it generally is. In B2B, it's more hit or miss for sure. For sure, just to have it up in mobile, because sometimes the client doesn't look at their own site on mobile ever. And we all use these big, beautiful desktops with these giant monitors all day, and it's not a mobile device. So definitely make sure to have that mobile up there and really thinking about that experience. And then just note down things and be like, oh, hey, I noticed this, I noticed that. Don't feel like you have to stay in your lane. If you notice a usability issue, even though maybe technically you're just talking about analytics or just talking about content or whatever, note that, because, if you see something, say something. I think that's really critical and also shows the client that you've got their back and you're helping them in more than just this particular, whatever lane that client has put you in.
So it sounds like you're really trying to sort of have them watch you walk through your data analysis and being curious about what's going on.
Oh yeah, and I tell them too, it's like being a detective. I think that that's the most exciting part of this job, is just being that detective and digging through stuff and being like, why is this happening, or why has that happened, or look at this. One of my favorite things to do with clients is actually go into Google Search Console and look at a page and look at the keywords for that page, and then find queries that aren't 100% related to that page, but it's still coming up for anyway, even if there's no clicks. Maybe there's not even that many impressions, but being like, look at this topic group that is coming up. Like, this is really interesting. Tell me, do you have conversations about this internally? This is something we should be talking about? And really thinking about, like, we already see this in the data. Let's do something about it.
Yeah. I love the mobile tip. I particularly, because all my clients are here in the DC area and we're sitting on top of where the internet was created. Yes. So the speed here is not like everywhere else. And I was working with the fisheries division of NOAA, and they actually had functionality. They wanted people to use fishermen on boats.
Oh, good luck.
Exactly. So one of the first things I did was, thank you, GTmetrix. You can like pivot to a location. I can't put them out into sea, but I can get sort of close in relation to ruralness, and then flip to mobile. and forced them to, I always do this. I actually record the dang video and I forced everybody to sit through the video. That tells the story better than anything else, because people start getting itchy because they're like, why is it still loading? Right?
Yeah. What's taking so long? Is my browser broken? Is the site broken? Like, yeah, that is what that Fisher person is thinking right now while they're stuck out on a lake, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's 100. That's such a great, thing for that too. And as someone who lives in a rural area, boy, do I get excited about, like sometimes where I live is very close to the US border. And so we can see America from our house. And sometimes I'll just be sitting in my living room. My phone's like, welcome to USA. Like I did nothing. I didn't even move. And now I'm in the States. And so we have we have a thing with the cell phone company where we're in America for less than 5 minutes. They don't actually charge us for it. And then we go back to Canada again later on. Like, welcome back to Canada. Did nothing. Still watching TV. But, thinking about it, like in that period, I have bad internet pretty regularly unless I'm on Wi-Fi. And so trying to do literally anything is so frustrating. I also, if you have a retail location too, one of the things that I always do, and I'm sure I can't be alone in this, is sometimes this is particularly bad for Home Depot. I'll be standing in Home Depot and I want to, look up a product, and I'm in your store and I go to your website and the back of the store sucks for mobile, and you don't have free internet or whatever it might be,
Exactly.
Just like make that easier for people. I think it'd be really interesting if you're a retail location to try to see the number of people who are probably like accessing your website from your actual retail location, which not only tells you that like maybe your signage sucks or you need kiosks or you need people who are actually going to make sure that people are, Home Depot's generally pretty good. If you look slightly confused, they'll come up to you and ask you if you need help with something, but like other stores are not so much for that. And I think that that's where it's, important to look at that data too.
I think that depends on where you live in the US. I always get floored with how good customer service is, not here. Anyway, just a side note about DC. If you come to DC, we have horrible customer service.
I do find that like American customer service is definitely like more aggressive than Canadian customer service. Canadian customer service is like, I don't feel like talking to anybody unless you ask,
Well, DC is fully like non-trained customer service. I'm going to be aggressive. Why are you bothering me? It's like this whole other culture. And I always forget that other places are nice. I traveled to Seattle because my husband's family isn't from Seattle. And every single time I'm floored by how nice people are, because it's just very different here.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, what do you think, and this is like the 10,000 question, what do you think about the future of data analytics, like the next 5-10 years with all this AI stuff and machine learning and the death of data? What are we doing?
I think that's really more so than the AI machine learning thing. I think actually the death of trackable data is really going to be what does this in. But I think it's going to vary wildly based on location. It's the EU is clamping down more and more. I mean, I think the EU really wants to have it so that you have to opt in. It's like everybody.
How many people are going to do that too?
No, they're
right?
not.
Like basically
they're going to click it accidentally and be like, oh no, this is.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the EU would really want to go to an opt-in model. The US probably, if, federally would probably want to have no tracking restrictions at all. You can track whatever you want, open season. And I think it's just like a philosophy to how that particular area has towards tracking. And so I think it's going to really depend on where you are in terms of the clients that you service, what you can and can't track. But I think one of the things that people really need to be more aware of is if you're actually following the rules. Just having a consent banner on your website doesn't actually stop tracking. You have to actually attach it so that choices are made on the back end based on what people say.
Yeah.
I think one of the more egregious ones I saw was this very large housewares brand that you would absolutely recognize as in every store in North America, probably, and in Europe. And they, when you went on their website and you said, no, don't track me, it sent off a conversion event to Facebook. Like, cool.
Yep.
That's a
Not
big
legal.
fine. Yeah. That was a very large, and I had my VPN set to Copenhagen. So that was what it was doing for a European visitor. So it's like, you are screwed. And they're like, yeah, our Google ads got shut off because they said we weren't respecting consent choices. Like, no, you definitely are not. And yeah, it's just like just having the banner does nothing. So I think it is important to educate yourself on like, is this actually being tracked properly? But then also explaining to leadership, like, this is why this is going down. There's so many threads I see all the time on like all the different Slacks I belong to, and the Google on Reddit, the GA4 forums on Reddit, and the Google forums for GA4. And they're like, we put in consent management. Now we see 50% of our traffic. What have we done wrong? Like, that's literally what consent management is. That's what's supposed to happen.
You've done it right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good job. You
Right.
did it correctly, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's where it's just like this huge education gap, which, you know, like I'm trying to fill, but I'm just one person.
Yeah.
It needs to be out there in the world too, that like this is what's going to happen. So depending upon where you are, you're either going to have lots of data or you're going to have very little data at all. And based on that, you're going to have to make some choices, and sitting around saying, oh, I wish I could track everyone is not actually going to solve the problem. You just have to think of other ways that you can get the data that you need without actually, you know, violating things that cost your company a lot of money.
Right. Right. So this has been amazing. Tons of helpful tips, I think, and there's going to be a ton of stuff on the landing page. So feel free to check all of that out. But what kind of other, if you had any other resources or wins that you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I would say my two courses are particularly something that I talk a lot about. So, my first course is called Analytics for Agencies, and it is analytics for agencies, although we have some in house people in there too. It is exactly what we do at Kickpoint when I am setting up analytics for our clients. It is all of my plans, it is my templates, it is my Google Tag Manager containers, it is my Looker Studio templates, my documents, the sales process, everything else. There's something like 7.5 hours of videos.
Wow.
So yeah, there's available. And then there's also Practical GA4, which is practical of application of GA4 start to finish. So it doesn't just walk you through. And I think one of the things that as a former trainer, and I think generally, like, I think that courses don't do well is they're like, click on this, you know, click save to save. Well, yeah, we all know that the button's called save. We can figure that out. That's not the point of this course. The point is, when would I need to do this? What are the common use cases that you see for GA4? So I have lots of how-tos based on questions that we've been asked from clients. And then also people in the course, there's a community that comes along with it. And people in Analytics for Agencies have a biweekly office hours. They can attend on Zoom with me as well. And the questions that people ask end up becoming part of the course as well. And I'm updating it as often as I can because, you know, GA4 changes approximately every 10 minutes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
definitely check those out. And if buying a course is not in your budget right now, I have the Playbook Huddle, which is at kpplaybook.com/newsletter. That's a biweekly newsletter. And we have exclusive tips that are just in the newsletter and nowhere else.
Right. Yeah, this has been awesome. So how can people learn more about you?
I would say LinkedIn is probably the place that I'm the most active. And if you Google Dana DiTomaso and really any variation of how you think my last name should be spelled, I should come up. So it's when I check Google Search Console, I'm like, wow, that's a way to spell my last name. So yeah.
There you go. So this has been fabulous. Thanks again for coming on the show. Definitely check out the resources and watch some of her other Whiteboard Fridays. They're really enlightening. Yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. To find out more about the podcast and what we're up to, go to digitalmarketingvictories.com. And if you like what you heard, subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Rate us, comment, and share the podcast, please. I'm always looking for new ideas, topics, and guests. Email us at digitalmarketingvictories@gmail.com or DM us on Twitter at DMVictories. Thanks for listening.